Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast, What's Your History Textbook Left Out? Today, we'll be talking to Professor David DeCosse about the Markkula tribe and its relation to religious history. If you could introduce yourself and kind of your work.
Sure enough. So my name is David DeCosse. I am the Director of Religious and Catholic Ethics at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. I have also been, for many years here, what's called the Director of Campus Ethics Programs, and I also teach in the Religious Studies Department here. So by training and background, I am actually a Catholic theologian specializing in social ethics. I'm especially interested in things or issues like the way we understand freedom and dignity in a social and political context. So that's who I am, and I'm really happy to be on the show with you here. So
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on board. I guess the main topic I want to discuss today was, as you mentioned, you had a bit of research done into Indigenous matters and their intersection with ethics and theology. In particular, I kind of came across one of the articles, Healing Haunted Histories, and the church's responsibilities on covering a lot of the histories untold in kind of textbooks nowadays and contemporary history classrooms. Uh, if you were just able to kind of give an introduction of this research and speak a bit more on it.
yes, by all means. So um, I I'm very interested in particular, in the Catholic engagement with these historical matters. And in California, of course, that is has to do with the mission history here in California. In the United States, there's all sorts of instances of in history of kind of a Catholic exploration engagement with indigenous people throughout the country in disastrous ways, not infrequently, like the boarding schools that we're hearing more and more about, as well as via kind of conceptual things, justifications for conquest of indigenous lands and things of that nature. So my real interest is in how can the Catholic community respond in a more honest way to these historical injustices. And I say that acknowledging some people in the Catholic community really have. They've taken some real steps. Um, Pope Francis has very explicitly apologized for the Catholic involvement in the boarding schools in Canada. Um, but the Canadian Catholic Church has been much more forthright, engaging with the Indigenous and opening up conversations and extending apologies for the Catholic Church's treatment of the Indigenous in Canada. I think in the United States, the Catholic community is behind, for instance, where the Canadian Catholic community is. I'm more familiar with the Catholic community. I do not mean to slight in any way the efforts of other Christian and other religious communities who, in their past iterations, may have participated in these historical injustices. And I don't mean to slight at all. There are many Indigenous, Catholic, Christian, and other religious adherents who are, of course, essential participants in these conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I've also been doing kind of a bit of research into the Markkula tribe, kind of local tribes here in the Bay Area. And the more and more just comes up about the history of the missions, about the acts of assimilation. Kind of with this history in mind, what do you think the role is of religious institutions nowadays in trying to, I guess, push this history back out to the community?
Yes, I just think that to me is such a great question because it's such a timely question. Because we can see around the United States, there are many efforts to um, kind of force our history lessons in schools into certain narrow categories or into certain, I'll put them kind of nationalistic categories. And I think this is a place where religious communities in the United States on account of their religious freedom, have the freedom to turn and face their histories and their participation in historical injustice in a way that can be honest, that can be public, that can offer to not only their own adherents, meaning Catholics, Christians today, but also to the broader public in the United States, justifications for apology, explanations of why they consider what happened in the past to be wrong, explanations for why they consider it important now to apologize, even if it was past adherents who, in a subjective sense, were the people responsible for what happened. So I think this is a moment, and I acknowledge the moment, but I also acknowledge not that many institutions are doing it, religious institutions in the United States now. More are, and I think it's a great moment for more and more of us to get involved in this.
Definitely. Kind of along the same vein of, I guess, apologies. It's kind of deviating from the topic a bit, but there have been kind of comparisons between apologetic statements from institutions and, for example, universities with land acknowledgments coming out more and more, saying that some people criticize these as being performative, inaccurate, sometimes insensitive. Do you think that there's a way that these institutions can kind of roll this out in a way that is more accommodation and more action driven?
Well, um, I I may be a little bit of an outlier on this one because I actually think the land acknowledgments, just as a statement, a speech act, they have an importance. I think it's to me, it's you know one of the key aspects of justice is truth. We owe each other the truth. That is a measure of justice. I don't mean to confine justice only to that at all, but that's a really crucial aspect of it. And I think that land acknowledgments in a simple, clear way are one act of justice by telling the truth. So I'm not, I respect people's desire for adding on to them, but I don't really agree with the critique that they're just performative and a waste of time. I don't think that's the case. I think we're dealing with an issue here that is complex, that it's going to take a lot of time. I mean, for good or for ill, it's just going to take a lot of time to figure out. And I think that the land acknowledgments are one step. More has to come, but it's one step, and it's a good step.
Definitely, yeah. In kind of more concrete education then, in terms of trying to get the truth out and its entire story, which I guess kind of just give you a bit of background. Unfold for All's concrete mission is to try and highlight these underrepresented, untold histories in the past. How do you think that like educational institutions, schools, universities, particularly those with a Catholic background, can kind of start trying to prioritize some of these undertold histories or trying to, I guess, stamp out a lot of the biases existing in a lot of these centuries old textbooks?
Yes, well, I think within the Catholic community, we have some hard work ahead of us. Um, I'm quite familiar with the story of Father Junipero Serra, considered the founder of the missions, at least the religious founder of the missions in California. And Father Serra has been made a saint within the Catholic Church, which is a very big and important deal. Um, and I recognize that there are many people with a great devotion, really a religious devotion to Father Serra. But I think what's happened also is that when we approach the complex history of the missions and Father Serra, we do so in too individualistic a way. We locate things almost only in terms of Father Serra, and we'll say He meant well. He didn't intend for all of these things. He cared deeply about the indigenous. I know people contest that about Father Sarah, but I want to stipulate that, and I actually think a lot of that is probably true, um, which doesn't, I'll just leave it there for now. But to me, that's insufficient because you could intend very well, you could mean very well, and that really doesn't still does sort of exhaust or excuse a more general sense of responsibility. And I think a way of thinking about this can be that, if we just stipulate, even if Father Sarah meant well, how did the indigenous experience a lot of what happened, of being compelled to the missions, to stay on the missions, of the loss of their land, of the loss of their culture? How did they experience that? And they didn't experience it well at all. And I think that that is a kind of needed objectivity as we approach within the Catholic world dealing with this history. Whatever Father Sarah's intentions were, that is not the whole story here. And we've got to engage and sort of immerse ourselves in this whole story. And I'll say this too, that, this is getting a little theological, but it's part of the issue, I think, for a Catholic and Christian community, that in that community, we believe in a God who created the world, meaning everything in the world, everyone in the world. It doesn't mean they're all Catholic, but it means they all have this inherent dignity. They all bear the image of God in some way. And that means that we have to pay attention as a matter of our faith, as a matter of a basic way of thinking about human reason and a basic way of thinking about morality, to what happens to other people, whether they're part of the Catholic community or not. It's a big deal. And we can't honestly, I don't think we can really be honest as Catholics until we do. That's what's missing. We need more of that, a lot more of that.
Definitely. Kind of broadening the view to beyond just the community itself and trying to, I guess, have more empathy to outside communities.
Definitely. In this case, I'll say one thing. Uh, Looking at, for instance, the experience of devastating diseases on the part of the indigenous during the mission history, communicable public health diseases that spread rapidly and were contagious and often fatal in terrible communal ways. Like, just kind of, in a way of putting it, walking into that history more honestly, more openly, trying to see things from the perspective of the indigenous. What was it like to kind of feel powerless, to being ill, to seeing this weird, strange illness you didn't understand because it came from somewhere else, passed around, and seeing all this death all around you? Like, what was that like? That's what we have to do, is enter more into the world of the experience of injustice, of wrong, and try to kind of take that in as a reality that certainly followed from the creation of this whole system.
Definitely, yeah. I guess speaking on the topic of the effect of the missions and a lot of the things that the indigenous communities kind of lost from the mission movement, uh, beyond kind of just the effects of people being confined to missions, the lands around the missions, the numerous diseases coming in, there was definitely a significant loss of culture and uh, I guess religious belief within the indigenous communities themselves. How do you think this should be treated from more of a contemporary perspective? How should we look back to uh, look back to kind of these events?
Well, I think it's so important, as you say, to think about this because we can think about the loss of land, we can think about the terrible fatality following from communicable diseases, but we have to think about the loss of culture. And that may seem more intangible to people, but that is in some ways almost as fatal a loss as anything else. So, I mean, I think there's a great reckoning that is going on in terms of that more and more. It needs to go on even more. But I know Pope Francis, when he was in Canada in the summer, I think of it was either 22 or 23, and that was the entire purpose of that trip was to go and apologize to Canadian, well, to Indigenous people now living in the land of Canada for the church's involvement in the boarding schools. And one of the things he expressly said was the profound injustice of stripping culture, trying to strip culture from Indigenous persons. Uh, so, in another way of putting it, he has also insisted that both as a matter of kind of human dignity in itself, as well as of a matter of any person's religious beliefs, whatever they are, that we have to understand and respect that every human being, in a sense, is a participant, a creator, an agent of culture. You don't get to religion by stepping outside of culture. You have to go through it. And so I think that the affirmation of indigenous culture now uh, and is, I know within the Catholic community, it happens more and more and more. And I think it's absolutely essential. And I'll say this as a Catholic Christian, I don't think of it as in any inherent way incompatible with what it means, with Catholic Christianity. I think the big mistake was we thought, and so many people still do think, Catholic Christianity is synonymous with European culture. And I think that the terrible events of the past that we're talking about was a terrible historical lesson in the slow realization that's not true. That's not true from a Catholic perspective. And that's not denigrating European culture in all sorts of ways. It's magnificent, and other ways it's terrible. Like kind of all cultures have those things, but um, Catholic Christianity is not. Uh, European culture is not essential to Catholic Christianity.
Yeah, I'd love to also kind of focus on the idea, as you mentioned, that kind of modern day Canada has kind of been a step further in working towards reparations and towards recognizing a lot of this history. I do remember from some of my own research that there are also, like in just Canadian history textbooks, the systems of boarding schools is also kind of more of a taught history. It's something less stigmatized. Do you think that this is kind of something inherent to the communities themselves? And in what way can we kind of work to be more similar to that, to work forward and to be more progressive?
Well, it's so interesting what you're saying, and I, uh, I think, as I said, I think we have a lot to learn from the Canadians about what they're doing on all these matters. I mean, I think it's been a really important step that the Interior Secretary of the United States under President Biden, her name is Deb, I think it was Deb Holland, is, I believe, a Navajo, and she presided over what I believe may be the kind of first exhaustive review of the history of boarding schools in the United States, boarding schools for the indigenous. And I mean, that is an act of history coming even from the US government that might be a great show. Talking to someone who could talk about that could be a great part of your podcast. But I, uh, um, I think that is super important. That's like step one, getting us going down the road. We have a history we can't deny. It's a history that's part of us. We have to deal with it. We have to turn into it. Um, and I couldn't agree more. I just think we have to tell these stories. We just have to. And the Canadians have told them more, and I think we're still there's more and more openness. There's people doing some great stuff in this country on these things, but we just have a really long way to go.
Yeah.
Really long way to go.
I think central to this idea too is though Unful for All is definitely more of a history based organization, there is something that there's some element that has to recognize that indigenous communities, indigenous peoples are still here today, and they're a growing population, and their culture is very much alive, very much present, and it shouldn't be treated as a relic of the past. In particular, a lot of articles have been recently coming out. One of my friends actually wrote one from the Municipal Journal about how the recent LA fires and the situation down south in LA could have very much benefited from indigenous stewardship, indigenous knowledge, uh, kind of in an effort to preserve these more contemporary aspects of indigenous culture and kind of raising recognition for that these communities are still very much here today. How do you think that we can push more for that as well, possibly in collaboration with these communities, showing that it's not a isolated effort? What are some of the ideas of kind of forming more of a cohesive community and benefiting from knowledge that's very much present today?
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. I know in my conversations with scholars at Santa Clara and with indigenous communities here, I have come to deeply appreciate what you're saying. That we have to recognize, the sort of not just the resilience, but the kind of presence, thriving creative presence today of so many indigenous communities. Um, I, I- I guess I'd say I think that that is maybe as we go back to the past, perhaps we should always pair that reality with our consideration of these terrible histories as well. And maybe that makes it even more kind of wonderful and powerful to consider, like, oh my gosh, these like great people, they've never given up. They came through like every creative effort to destroy them, and they've said no.
Definitely, yeah. In terms of kind of just, I thank you so much for answering all of this, by the way. But in terms of kind of what I wanted to cover today, that was about it. I just wanted to see, do you have anything you want to add?
I think I would just add that really. Oh, whoops! I just got a. Sorry about that. Um, Isaac. I'll come back. Here we go. Oh, there we go. I mean, Isaac, I'm so glad you're doing this. I think this is something that, in a way, there's a lot of forces pushing back against this stuff now in our country. Um, and I think, the way we're going to do it is by people making courageous choices like yourself to say, I'm one guy, but we got to do this. And what can I do to foster these conversations? How can I step into them? Even I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't mean you don't know what you're doing, but I think it can, I say that myself, it's awkward. I don't really know what to say sometimes talking to Indigenous persons about these things. It feels awkward. It feels like I trip over my own feet. But can I just find a sense of goodwill and a sense of agency to sort of keep showing up? And with a sense of openness to learn, a desire for the truth, and even a bit of courage just to kind of stay in that truth, stay in the search for it, and in the search for it with a sense of peace, a sense of hope for the future. So that's what I would say. A little intangible, but honestly, maybe those intangible things of the spirit, that's the key thing that in some way ultimately drives us forward.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. I hope that ultimately the goal is education. Hopefully, this inspires more people to kind of take a look back and just observe what might have been omitted. Kind of on that, I guess a bit of the same note. I'm actually hosting in the upcoming month of February. I'm going to be visiting a couple of my local middle schools, and I'm going to be teaching a lesson on I guess since they're arriving right around Manifest Destiny around that time. I was hoping to kind of install a 3-day lesson of the history of the Ohlone tribes, in particular the missions. And I think this conversation would be a great example of why these lessons are important even in the contemporary like standpoint. Would you mind if I just kind of like showed it to them and
Not at all. Not at all. I'd be, I would be very kind of honored if this could help your work in some way, Isaac. So, yeah. And let me know. I mean, I know people around here at Santa Clara who know a lot more about this than I do. And they're great folks. I don't know their schedules and all that, but if you ever want to talk to a few more folks, let me know, and I'd be certainly happy to ask them.
definitely, yeah, if you could if you have anyone you think would be interested in the project, I think upcoming right now I'm just scheduled to talk to I think I'm waiting on a response from Professor Panich and then
Oh, good. I know him, we're friends, and he's a great guy, and he knows this history extremely well.
yeah, I can tell I've tried to like take a look at some of his work and I've just been kind of astounded by like the depth of all of it.
Yes. He really knows it extremely well. And um think of him, and I mean there's many others, but
I was
I
also going to talk to Miss Baines, who organized the Native American Symposium for the past couple of years, I think.
yes, I think Lauren is another great person, and Lauren, I think, is also very well connected to the Ohlone community in this area, and she could be really helpful for um, just illuminating that or maybe facilitating things there and all. So that could be great. I was just thinking of one other thing I can't remember, but if it comes back, I'll let you know.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much for coming out here, and I'll try and get this done, edited, and I'll send it back to you and see what you think.
Well, Isaac, keep up the awesome work, man.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
great stuff. I really appreciate it. I'm really happy to talk to you and glad this all worked out.
Awesome. Again, just thank you so much and have a nice evening.
All right, you as well. All right, good night.